Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mr. P's virtual civics class. Let's get started. First, let's look at the results of our mock election. 46 respondents. 46 of you answered the call to be voters and let your voice be heard. And of you 46, you have elected Donald John Trump, the incumbent, for another 4-year term of office as the President of the United States, with a was that 6.6% lead over Joe Biden. So another 4 years of Donald Trump is what you guys chose. For the House of Representatives, you have chosen to re-elect the incumbent Vern Buchanan of the Republican Party by a massive, what we would call a landslide victory, 71% to 28%. Now the Florida amendments, 58% voted yes, supporting the amendment to state that only a citizen of the US can vote in Florida. And overwhelmingly, a yes vote to increase the state's minimum wage incrementally to $15 per hour by 2026. There you go. We'll see if the actual voters in November decide in a similar fashion to what you guys have decided. So Donald Trump for president. Interesting. We'll see if the country agrees with you guys. Great job voting. I hope you enjoyed it. Okay, let's see if I can share today's actual lesson. Can I find it? Here it is. Okay, today we are talking about the United Nations, the UN. Think about this. What are the potential consequences if two countries don't get along? What can happen if the United States is not getting along with another country? Think about that. Something that occurs inside of our country is a domestic issue. Foreign affairs are things that are happening outside of our borders. It's how we relate to other countries. It's how we make friends with other governments, and how we solve problems together, cooperating, working together. Those are foreign affairs. The domestic stuff is inside of our country. So whether we build another school in Sarasota, it's domestic. Whether we allow 18-year-olds to smoke and drink and vote, it's a domestic issue. It only affects people inside of our home, inside of our borders. It's domestic. Global interdependence is a concept that acknowledges that nations rely on each other in terms of economy, security. We affect one another. We didn't really talk about this. We didn't have time, but the butterfly effect is this concept. It's also the name of a movie, but it's this wacky idea that a butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, and in the Atlantic you have a hurricane. That somehow the two events are connected. Something small in one part of the world can have massive consequences based on the chain of events, and it's kind of like magic. We don't really fully understand it. It's called the butterfly effect, and it's kind of true, right? Someone was infected by a bat somewhere in Wuhan, China, and the butterfly effect is the whole world now is in lockdown. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed by this pandemic. But it all started with one small action, one small infection. Somebody getting scratched, or eating the wrong thing, or buying the wrong creature at a market, a wet market. American foreign policy is conducted primarily by the executive branch. The President of the United States is our chief diplomat. It just so happens that the president is a busy guy. He doesn't have time to be running around the planet making friends with all the other countries that exist. So he has someone called the Secretary of State to assist him. The Secretary of State manages the country's foreign affairs, manages our system of almost 300 embassies, consulates, and diplomatic missions. It's the United States Senate who confirms or denies the president's appointments to ambassador. So people who work at an embassy, the head diplomat is called an ambassador, and they are appointed by the president and they have to be confirmed by the Senate. It's another example of a check and balance in our system. So here's our planet, here's Earth and all the countries and all of the borders. Our country operates almost 300 embassies. We talk to everyone else on planet Earth. We have our ambassadors who are language experts who can speak to them in their own language and work with them to solve problems and cooperate together for a number of issues. Could be economic issues, could be security issues, trying to end a conflict or prevent a war, or hammer out a trade deal so that we can make more money and make more trade and be better off economically. So this work is called diplomacy. It is the work of persuasion. It is the work of making deals, trying to get people to cooperate, maintaining friendships, even just maintaining communication can be difficult. There are some countries who we don't talk to. It's kind of like, you know, think of your own personal life. There might be some kid that you don't get along with, you've had a fight with them, and you just don't even look at each other. You don't talk to one another. It's that way with governments. It's that way with the United States and North Korea. We don't talk to them. They don't talk to us, and we have to ask our friends to talk for us, because otherwise we disagree so much that it might end up with war. That's one of the things that can happen when two countries disagree. That's the worst case scenario, is war. So we know that the Secretary of State is the fourth in line and one of the most powerful people in our government. I did issue that retraction, that correction from yesterday's lesson. It's the president, vice president, then the Speaker of the House, then the President pro tempore of the Senate, and then the Secretary of State. So fifth most powerful, also known as the fourth in line to the presidency. So after World War I, we're talking 1918, World War I, or the Great War ended. There was an organization created called the League of Nations, and it was created by Woodrow Wilson and other allied nations. And the purpose of this organization was to prevent another world war. They didn't want another world war that would kill millions of people and destroy countries. So they created this League of Nations. And it was part of the Paris Peace Conference. Woodrow Wilson won the Nobel Peace Prize for creating the League of Nations. So the goal was, hey, let's work together. For the first time, instead of just everyone having their own State Department and working one-on-one with each other, let's have a place where we gather together, we talk about our issues, and we prevent another world war. It failed. How do we know it failed? Because we had World War II. World War II started in the late 1930s, and they realized, hey, League of Nations, no good. One second. Hey, can you keep her quiet? I'm trying to record. Can you put her outside? Sorry about that. One of my kids is singing in the background. All right, so the League of Nations failed in creating peace and preventing another world war. World War II ravaged the world between the late 1930s and it really ended in 1945. So after the end of World War II, the countries involved realized, you know what, now that at the end of World War II, now that we have nuclear bombs, now that we have the atomic bomb, this is a game changer. We, for the first time as a species, could destroy the entire planet so that no one lives. We really need to get this right. Let's try again. Let's create a new organization, and we're going to call it the United Nations. And we're going to have a fancy blue flag with an olive wreath, and it's going to show a top-down view of planet Earth. So the goal of the UN is to promote cooperation, maintain peace and order, and today there are 193 member countries as part of the UN. Their headquarters is in New York City. New York City, and this fantastic modern building, this was one of the first modern buildings when it was built in the 1940s. This is actually, New York City was gracious enough to actually donate this chunk of New York City. So this is actually international land. It's not, when you walk into the UN, you are not on American soil anymore. You are in international soil. You're on neutral territory, and that's where the United Nations is located, in New York City. The organization of the UN is, you have to understand, this is not a world government. It's not a government, so you can't think of it in terms of legislative, executive, and judicial. It kind of sort of is, it kind of mimics government, but it's not, because it is a collection of governments working together. So in the center here, we have the General Assembly. And in the General Assembly, there are 193 members. Every country gets one vote. And the General Assembly is not like a legislature. They don't pass laws for planet Earth. They make recommendations. So when they vote on something, if a majority of the countries want something to be done, it is still only a recommendation. There is a leader of the UN, and he or she is called the Secretary General. So whatever the General Assembly wants or recommends, the Secretary General implements that. But hold on, there is something called the veto power. The veto power is held by all 5 permanent members of the Security Council. So look up here. These are the winners of World War II. The United States, Great Britain, France, Russia, and China. These 5 countries, the winners of World War II, gave themselves a permanent seat on the Security Council. And if any one of them says no and vetoes something that the General Assembly recommends, that thing does not happen. So what we see a lot of in the United Nations is, hey, let's end the war in Syria. Well, Russia doesn't want that to happen, so Russia vetoes. Hey, let's pass sanctions against Saudi Arabia. Well, America doesn't want that to happen, so they veto it. So these countries are forced to work together in the United Nations, but they're always able to veto each other. So really not a lot happens. You can't really get much done. The Security Council also has the power of the peacekeeping forces, the Blue Berets or the Blue Helmets. They have their own, the UN has its own army. It's only about 100,000. But if the Security Council if no one on the Security Council vetoes it and the General Assembly wants it, the Secretary General can then send in the peacekeeping forces, the Blue Berets, the Blue Helmets, and they can go into a country and stabilize it and stop warring factions from killing each other. So they can kind of cool down the situation and prevent a huge war. There are these other organizations, the Economic and Social Council, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice. So from time to time, you'll hear about some leader who committed genocide and killed hundreds of thousands of people, and they get sent to the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court. And there are people who want the UN to become a world government, and there are people who say, no, that's a bad idea. We'll see what happens. The last part of the UN are called these organs and specialized agencies. And we'll talk about UNICEF. The other three, we don't need to know about those organs. And we'll talk about the WTO and the WHO. You've probably heard a lot about the WHO recently. And UNESCO, a lot of people have heard of UNESCO. It's basically cultural heritage. Like, think of the wonders of the world, like the pyramids of Egypt. UNESCO basically holds a register of all the important places in the world of cultural and historic importance, and basically recommends that those places are not destroyed or developed or bulldozed, because, hey, this is important for all of humanity, for all of planet Earth. So please don't destroy the pyramids. Or, and you'd be surprised, there are places where they've taken archaeological wonders and they've destroyed them. And UNESCO tries to step in and tell them, hey, don't do that. So UNICEF, this is one of the organs. Where are we? This is one of the organs as part of the UN. It was created after World War II, and it's an acronym. It's really the United Nations Children's Fund, or United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund. And it was basically created to deal with the fact that after World War II, there were tens of millions of people wandering Europe with no food, and they had no homes, and all their homes were destroyed, and there were millions of people displaced, and people just getting out of concentration camps. And winter was coming, and how are we going to we're going to have a huge humanitarian crisis if the snow starts falling and none of these people have shelter or food. So let's create an organization and let's deliver food and get these people some help. That's how UNICEF got started. It's a fantastic organization. Today, they continue to go to parts of the world that don't have access to clean water or food, and they give help to people. They have a yearly budget of $5 billion. 2/3 of that comes from governments, 1/3 of it from private donations. You can donate to UNICEF. 92% of the funds are spent on their programs, which is an excellent percentage. There are some charities out there that only donate 2 or 3% of the money you give them to actually delivering services. UNICEF is 92%. That's a really good percentage. And they have a presence in over 190 countries. So they go into these little villages and they make sure that kids have food to eat and clean water to drink, and they give vaccines and that sort of thing. Okay, the World Health Organization, or the WHO. The World Health Organization, let me get my face out of here. As you can tell, this is the UN logo with a medical symbol on top of it. Their mantra, their reason for existence is to fight and prevent diseases worldwide. They do have some success. They have completely eliminated smallpox from planet Earth. They have a 99% elimination of polio, which is a debilitating disease. They've also decreased river blindness disease, and they work toward getting countries to coordinate efforts to create vaccines, right? So every developed country has its own healthcare system, and we have scientists who are working towards making vaccines. What the World Health Organization does, or what they try to do, is coordinate so that if a scientist in Germany has a breakthrough, there might be a scientist or a laboratory in America who's working toward that same end, And the World Health Organization will say, hey, this is the breakthrough we've seen in Germany, and they share that information so that work is not duplicated, so that work is shared and that progress is made quicker than if people were duplicating the same work and creating the same knowledge at the same time. So there's always hundreds and hundreds of different vaccines that they're working on, whether it's diagnostic or to as a therapy to help get people over a disease. So they are the ones who, the World Health Organization, is tracking those products that are in the pipeline to figure out which ones are going to work, which ones might have bad side effects, which ones might be a cure. It's good work that they do. Next, the World Trade Organization. 150 countries are members. The World Trade Organization works to promote free trade. They try to remove trade barriers between countries and resolve trade disputes. The more that, let's put it this way, trade is one of the best ways to maintain peace. If we are trading something with another country, then it's way less likely that we will go to war and drop bombs, because we want their stuff and they want our stuff, and it's a mutual beneficial relationship. If we're not trading, though, and we have nothing to gain from the existence of another group of people, we might be willing to bomb their cities and drop bombs on them and create massive mass destruction if we're trading. And we like their products and they like our products, and we have a mutual beneficial relationship, we're more likely to be friends and to be peaceful with one another. And the World Trade Organization works toward that end, to create and negotiate fair trade agreements between countries. Okay, so that's all you need to know about the United Nations. There is a General Assembly, but they only make recommendations. This is not a world government. They don't get to pass laws. They don't get to tell America or any other country how to run their country, because this is more of a league of friendship, we might say. It's the successor to the League of Nations. There is a Security Council in which any one of those 5 permanent members can veto and stop an action. If everyone's in agreement, or if no one vetoes, then the UN can send peacekeeping forces to stop a war or to end a conflict. The UN also has important organs and specialized organizations like UNICEF to deliver food to children in need, as well as the World Health Organization to manage the creation of vaccines around the world, and the World Trade Organization to promote trade between countries, because if we are trading, we're not fighting. Thank you for your attention. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.